Hello, it's me. Welcome to my channel. Many of us were raised hearing about God's chosen people, the children of Israel. We heard how God chose them to be His people, and how He made a covenant with them through Abraham, promising to make their descendants into a great nation. But when we look at the history of God's chosen people, we see that they didn't always do what God asked of them. In fact, most of the time, they strayed from Him. Yet God was faithful to His word. He never broke His covenant with them. And despite their shortcomings, He still called them His chosen people. So what makes God's chosen people so special? Is it their good works or their faith? Or maybe it's their ability to do what's right, even when faced with temptation? Well, all of these things are important, but there's something else that sets God's chosen people apart. It's the plot twists that they never see coming. Let us explore some of these plot twists and see how they affect the story of God's chosen people. When God first chose Abraham to be His friend, He promised to make his descendants into a great nation. But Abraham was already very old, and his wife Sarah was even older. They had no children yet, and Abraham thought it was too late for them to have a baby. But God told Abraham not to worry, because He would give them a son when they were both very old. And even though it seemed impossible, God kept His promise. When Abraham was 100 years old, Sarah gave birth to Isaac. But then something unexpected happened. When Isaac was grown up, God told him to leave his home and go to a land that God would show him. This was a big surprise for Isaac, because he'd never been away from home before, and he didn't know where he was going or what he would find there. But Isaac trusted God and followed His voice. That's why, in Genesis chapter 26, verse 3, it says, "Go, I will make your offspring many, and I will bless you, and will greatly increase your offspring, and will establish my promise, which I have spoken to you and to your offspring after you, for an everlasting possession shall they return." Now, this is a plot twist, because Isaac didn't expect God to bless him and make his offspring many. After all, he was only the son of one couple who lived in a small tent. But God's plans were much bigger than Isaac could have ever imagined. After Isaac left his home, he came across a well in the wilderness. And there he met a group of shepherds who worked for a man named Ishmael. Ishmael wasn't very nice, and he tried to take all of Isaac's water. But Isaac refused to give up, and in the end, he got to keep his water. This was another plot twist for Isaac, because he did unknow that there was a group of people living in the wilderness, and he certainly didn't expect them to try and steal his water. But Isaac was able to stand up for himself and protect what was his. Isaac also had twin sons, Jacob and Esau. And when it was time for them to be blessed by their father, Jacob tricked Esau and stole his blessing. This was a major plot twist because it completely changed the course of history. You see, God had promised that the older twin would serve the younger twin. And when Jacob stole the blessing, he became the older twin in the eyes of their father. This meant that Jacob was supposed to receive the land that God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and their descendants. But Jacob didn't realize any of this. He just wanted to take care of his mother and trick his brother. But God used Jacob's actions to carry out his plan. Jacob also had 12 sons, and they became the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. But Jacob didn't know that his sons would become the founders of a nation. He just loved his sons very much and wanted to give them the best possible future. But God used Jacob's love to carry out his plan. Now, Joseph is one of Jacob's sons, and he was sold into slavery by his own brothers. But God used Joseph's slavery to save an entire nation. You see, while Joseph was in prison, he interpreted a dream for the Pharaoh. And in exchange, the Pharaoh made Joseph his second in command. Then, when there was a famine in the land, Joseph was able to use his position to save his family and the Egyptians. This was a major plot twist for Joseph, because he did unknow that he was going to become second in command of the Egyptians. And he certainly did unexpect that he would be able to save his family and an entire nation. But God used Joseph's situation to carry out his plan. And it wasn't just physical slavery that God used to save his people. In Exodus chapter 20, God told Moses to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. But Moses was afraid because he didn't think he was qualified for the job, and he didn't know if Pharaoh would let them go. But God reassured Moses and told him not to worry because he would be with him. This was a big plot twist for Moses, because he didn't realize that God had chosen him to be the leader of his people. And he certainly didn't expect that God would help him free his people from slavery. But God used Moses' faith to carry out his plan. Moses also led the Israelites out of the wilderness and into the promised land. But before they could enter the promised land, they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. This was a huge plot twist for the Israelites, because they didn't know that they would be stuck in the wilderness for so long. And they certainly didn't expect that they would be able to enter the promised land for 40 years. But God used the Israelites wandering to teach them obedience and dependence on Him. So we can see that God's chosen people were constantly being surprised by what God had planned for them. They didn't know what was going to happen next, because God was always working in mysterious ways. But through all of these plot twists, God remained faithful to His promises. He never broke His covenant with His people, even when they weren't very nice to Him. And that's a lesson we can all learn from God. No matter what happens, we can trust that He'll always be with us, and He'll always have a plan for our lives. Another thing that I want to point out is that these plot twists weren't always easy for God's chosen people. They often had to face difficult decisions and make sacrifices. For example, Abraham had to leave his home and go to a land that God would show him. But Abraham didn't know where he was going or what he would find there. He was leaving everything familiar behind and stepping into the unknown. But Abraham trusted God and followed him anyway. This shows us that following God isn't always easy. Sometimes we have to leave the familiar behind and step into the unknown. But if we trust God, He'll lead us every step of the way. Following God also means being willing to make sacrifices. This meant that he had to say goodbye to his family and friends and start over in a new place. But Isaac was willing to make this sacrifice because he knew that it was for God. And when he arrived in the new land, he found more than he could have ever imagined. This teaches us that following God isn't always easy. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices and leave what's familiar behind. But if we're willing to make those sacrifices, God will reward us beyond our greatest expectations. I've only scratched the surface of God's chosen ones here. There are so many other stories of plot twists that they never saw coming. But I hope this gives you a good starting point for exploring this topic further. What are some other examples of plot twists that God's chosen people never saw coming? How did these twists affect the story of God's chosen people? How does it affect you today? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. That's it for me. Thanks for watching. Please like and share if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.